All right, so today we are diving into some really interesting research.
About dates and how they affect blood sugar.
Okay.
Now, I have to admit, when I first saw this topic, I was a little skeptical myself. I mean, dates.
Dates are sweet, right?
Super sweet.
Like they're known for being sweet. So,
Seems like something that if you were
trying to manage diabetes, you'd probably,
want to avoid them,
yeah, it's a common misconception for sure. I think we tend to,
just connect sweet with a blood sugar spike,
mm,
and for good reason.
okay.
But I think as this research kind of highlights,
Yeah.
sometimes those assumptions about food, we need to take a closer look.
Yeah, okay, so let's take a closer look.
Specifically at a 2019 study
Okay.
that was done in Pakistan, and this was published in the Journal of Shifa.
Tamir Imalat University. And they asked a really straightforward question.
How does eating dates affect blood sugar?
Compared to eating white bread.
Okay.
And they didn't just look at people with diabetes,
They actually looked at people.
both with and without diabetes.
And what's really interesting is where this study took place.
Yeah.
In Pakistan, where dates are such a staple food, especially.
It's from Ramadan. So it's interesting to see this research not just through like a scientific lens, but like a cultural lens too.
It's like saying, okay, we can't just tell people to avoid dates.
Right.
Because for some people, that's a really important part of their diet
It seems.
and their culture.
Yeah.
So how did they design this study to kind of get to the bottom of this?
So they used what's called a crossover design, which basically means each person in the study tried both the dates and the bread at different times.
And acted as their own control.
Oh, interesting.
Which is really cool because it kind of eliminates
yeah.
individual variations in how people might metabolize food.
So you get a clearer picture of like...
Is it the food or is it the person?
Yeah, it's like this built-in comparison within each person.
Exactly.
That's really cool. Okay, so what did they find?
Did dates just like totally send people's blood sugar through the roof?
Well, it wasn't quite as simple as that.
Okay.
As you might expect, both the dates and the white bread did cause blood sugar to rise.
In people with diabetes.
Huh.
But here's the catch.
Okay.
The difference between the two wasn't actually that significant from a statistical standpoint.
Interesting. So not necessarily a free pass.
But also not public enemy number one.
Exactly.
Like you might have thought.
Yeah, and it gets even more interesting when you look at like the pattern of the blood sugar response.
So dates cause this quick spike at that 30-minute mark.
But then, and this is well correlated, blood sugar levels actually dipped back down low where they started.
Wait, hold on.
It spiked and then went below the starting point.
Below the starting point.
That doesn't make
sense.
Right. It really challenges that assumption that dates equal sugar rush.
Okay.
So one reason for that rapid rise and fall could be the high fructose and fiber content of dates.
Because research suggests that both of those things can actually slow down how quickly.
Glucose, the sugar in our blood, actually gets absorbed.
So even though you get that spike,
it's short-lived.
Okay, so it's not just about if it raises blood sugar, but like how our bodies process it over time. And it sounds like with dates, there's a lot more to that story than we might think.
Way more than meets the eye with dates.
This is blowing my mind. I'm already like, all right, maybe I had dates all wrong.
This is fascinating. Okay, so this Pakistani study really challenges our assumptions.
It does.
But obviously, this is just one piece of the puzzle.
For sure.
So to get a broader perspective.
I think it makes sense to shift gears and look at that 2024 editorial that you shared from the World Journal of Diabetes.
And this really did feel like a deep dive into the deep dive.
It did.
They looked at 24 different studies on dates, blood sugar.
Wow.
And they even went deeper into some of the more, I don't know, mechanisms of what's going on.
Yeah. And the author of this editorial is an endocrinologist.
So they really dug into the nitty-gritty of the research.
Yeah.
Which I appreciated. Yeah, it didn't feel like they were just summarizing.
Right.
It felt like they were really looking at it critically.
Yeah.
And even pointing out limitations in some of the research.
Which is so important.
Which is so important, yeah.
You got to be critical.
So within those 24 different studies that they looked at,
some fascinating things emerged.
Especially when it came to this idea of insulin.
Okay.
Okay, so before we even get into that.
Can you remind me what insulin is?
Because I always get it mixed up with...
something else that my body does.
Of course. So insulin is basically like the key...
that unlocks our cells to let glucose from the food we eat
enter and provide energy.
Okay.
So when our body doesn't produce enough insulin or our cells become resistant to it...
that's when we see blood sugar levels rise, which can lead to a whole host of health problems, especially for those with diabetes.
Insulin, the key. Got it.
Or the key.
Okay, so What were some of these fascinating details?
About dates and insulin.
So, some of the animal studies
That's it.
that this editorial looked at suggested that date extracts could actually increase insulin production
Whoa.
and improve blood sugar control.
Really?
And the possible heroes in this scenario, flavonoids.
Flavonoids, those are
Those are the things in plants that are
yes,
good for you.
those beneficial compounds.
Like that make blueberries blue and exactly
Yeah.
good for you.
Dates happen to have a unique combination of these flavonoids.
Which might be why they seem to have this effect on insulin.
Interesting, okay.
The theory is that these flavonoids could be acting directly on the pancreas,
Which is the organ that produces insulin.
so potentially boosting insulin production.
Potentially
Really?
at the source.
We're at the source.
Wow, that's amazing.
Okay, but you did say animal studies, so we can't just assume that it's going to be
Can't generalize to
the
humans.
same in humans.
Right.
Did this editorial also look at human studies?
They did.
Okay.
And they did include human studies.
Yeah.
A lot of them were small, which the author did point out as a limitation.
Okay, smaller studies, harder to generalize the results for sure.
Exactly. But did they show anything promising?
They did,
Okay.
even with the smaller sample sizes.
The study suggested that dates didn't cause those dramatic, long-lasting blood sugar spikes.
That people often fear.
Interesting. Okay, so potentially boosting insulin production and not sending you on this, like, blood sugar roller coaster.
Right.
Okay, 2 points for dates. All right.
2 points for dates. This is exciting.
I know. I'm like, wow, dates are coming back.
You're making a comeback.
Okay, this is where I think things get really, really interesting.
Okay.
So we've got this potential insulin boosting effect.
Yeah.
We've got, from the Pakistani study, this like...
It dipped below the starting point.
Right.
Yeah.
What if...
What is the possibility here?
The possibility
Yeah.
is that some dates might contain substances that act very similarly to insulin in our bodies,
Whoa.
like nature's little insulin helpers.
Like little helpers.
That's amazing.
But you did say the possibility.
Yes.
So I'm guessing we need a little more research to say that definitively.
We definitely need more research.
Okay.
Larger, longer-term studies,
Yep.
especially with a food like dates where
Really?
there's so much variation.
Of course.
The type of date, how it was grown, how ripe it is.
Right.
All of those factors could affect how it impacts blood sugar.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense.
We don't want to just like jump to conclusions based on one study
Right.
or generalize too much.
Uh-huh.
This already has me seeing dates in a whole new light.
I know.
And speaking of new perspectives,
Okay.
let's talk about the gut microbiome.
Yes.
I get so excited every time we talk about the gut microbiome.
Me too. It's such a...
Because it's like this hidden world inside of us
It's a whole ecosystem.
that we're just starting to understand.
Right.
And this editorial really highlighted how dates might go beyond just blood sugar
Okay.
and actually impact our gut health, which I thought was really fascinating.
Yeah, because it's true. We're learning more and more about
The trillions of bacteria that live in our gut.
trillions with a T.
Trillions with a T.
It's crazy.
It's mind-blowing in how they impact.
Pretty much every aspect of our health,
Yeah.
especially when we think about chronic diseases like diabetes.
Yeah, and this editorial really honed in on that connection between the gut microbiome and blood sugar control,
Right.
which is, I think, why they even brought up this Pakistani study,
Okay.
because it's not just about that immediate blood sugar response.
Okay.
It's also about the potential for dates to
Mm-hmm.
impact those little bacterial buddies.
In our gut.
Right, and this is where we can bring back that intriguing finding.
From the Pakistani study,
Okay.
that blood sugar dipped below the starting point.
Yeah.
Remember that.
Oh my gosh, how could I forget? It was like this magical blood sugar lowering effect after that initial spike.
I know. It's so interesting.
Yeah.
And while we can't rule out other factors, of course,
Right.
one theory is that this dip below the starting point could be partly due to beneficial changes in the gut microbiome over time.
Okay, so maybe those dates were actually helping to cultivate.
Like a community of gut bacteria that's better at keeping blood sugar in check.
That's the idea. And
Yeah.
we know that the types of bacteria in our gut
Right.
can influence how we metabolize sugar, how our bodies respond to insulin.
Some bacteria are like sugar processing ninjas.
I love
They're
that.
in there,
Sugar processing ninjas.
keeping things balanced.
Okay, I'm picturing them with little headbands on,
Exactly.
fighting the sugar.
So it's possible that dates, especially eaten regularly.
Could be like sending in reinforcements for those
Oh.
good gut bacteria.
Interesting.
It's like providing prebiotics.
Right.
Those fibers that feed the good bacteria in our gut
Mm.
help them to thrive.
Yeah, like fertilizer for our good bacteria.
Exactly.
I like it. Okay.
Of course, we need more research to confirm this link definitively.
Okay.
but is a fascinating avenue for future studies.
For sure, it really does paint that Pakistani study in a whole new light.
It does.
It's not just about that immediate blood sugar response.
Yeah.
It's this potential long-term benefit of how it could be impacting our gut health.
The gut microbiome is so important for so many things.
It really is. This is blowing my mind.
Right.
Okay, but before we get too carried away.
Yeah. The editorial did mention some potential downsides to dates.
Right.
Right. Something about contamination risks.
Yeah. So, as with any food, especially those that are often dried and stored at room temperature, there's always a risk of contamination.
That makes sense.
The editorial mentioned the possibility of fungi bacteria, even hepatitis A, depending on how the dates are handled and stored.
Okay, so maybe not grabbing them out of that dusty old bin.
Probably not the best source.
At the back of the pantry.
Yeah.
It's been there for who knows how long.
Right.
Okay.
But it doesn't mean dates are inherently unsafe.
Right.
It just highlights the importance of buying from reputable sources that prioritize food safety and storing them properly.
Which honestly is a good reminder.
For any food.
Any food.
Right? Like, let's be safe out there.
Exactly.
Okay.
So to wrap this all up, I have to say this has been quite the journey.
It has. Yeah. Like, I started out this dope dive thinking dates were basically sugar bombs.
Right.
And now...
Oh my God. Maybe I should be adding these to my grocery list.
And that's the beauty of scientific inquiry, isn't it?
It really is.
Challenging our assumptions.
Exploring the evidence.
And often uncovering a more nuanced picture.
100%. And I think that's exactly what we've done here.
We really dove into the research on dates and blood sugar.
Yeah.
And it turns out it's a lot more complicated than we might initially think.
Right.
And it's not just about that immediate spike or not spike.
Right.
It's also about these potential long-term benefits.
Exactly.
On the gut microbiome.
The gut microbiome, yeah.
Which is so cool.
So important.
It is so important.
So for a listener out there.
Here's a final thought.
Okay.
If a food as seemingly simple as a date
can have such a complex impact on our health.
Yeah.
What other commonly held food beliefs might deserve a second look?
Right. What if those quote-unquote bad foods
aren't so bad after all?
Right.
And what if those good foods are more nuanced than we think?
Exactly.
It's definitely food for thought.
Food for thought. I love it.
Quite literally.
Literally.
So until next time, keep exploring.
And keep diving deep.
Love it.
It was like a magic trick. It went up and then down below where it started. I don't know how that worked.
Right. And that's what I'm saying. It really does challenge those assumptions about dates just being a sugar bomb. And like you said, while we can't rule out other factors, one theory is that this dip could be partly due to beneficial changes in the gut microbiome over time.
So maybe those dates were actually helping to cultivate a community of gut bacteria that's better at keeping blood sugar in check.
That's the idea. We know that the types of bacteria in our gut can influence how we metabolize sugar.
How our bodies respond to insulin.
Right.
Some bacteria are like sugar processing ninjas.
I love those guys.
Right. They're in there working hard, keeping things balanced.
Yeah.
So it's possible that dates, especially eaten regularly, could be like sending in reinforcements for those good gut bacteria.
Okay, so it's like we're talking about prebiotics.
Exactly.
That's like fertilizer for a good bacteria.
Exactly. Like feeding those little guys.
I like it.
Of course, we need more research to confirm this link definitively.
Of course.
But it's a fascinating avenue for future studies, for sure.
Yeah. This is so cool.
Yeah.
It really does paint that Pakistani study in a whole new light.
It does. It's not just about that immediate blood sugar response.
Right.
It's this potential long-term benefit of how dates could be impacting our gut health.
It really is fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay, but before we get too carried away.
Right.
The editorial did mention some potential downsides to dates.
Right, as with any food.
Especially those that are often dried and stored at room temperature.
Right.
There's always a risk of contamination.
That makes sense.
The editorial mentioned the possibility of fungi bacteria, even hepatitis A.
Oh, no.
Depending on how the dates were handled and stored.
Okay, so maybe not grabbing them out of that dusty old bin.
Probably not the best idea.
In the back of the pantry that's been there for who knows how long.
Yeah. We want to be careful.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean dates are inherently unsafe or anything like that.
Right.
It just highlights the importance of buying from reputable sources that prioritize food safety.
Of course.
And storing them properly.
Which, honestly, that's a good reminder for any food.
For any food, right?
It's like, let's be safe out there.
Sanitation is key.
Yes, sanitation is key. Okay, well, this has been quite a journey for me.
It has been fascinating.
I started out this deep dive thinking dates were basically sugar bombs.
Right.
And now I'm like, huh, maybe I should be adding these to my grocery list.
And that's the beauty of this kind of research and these deep dives, right?
This is
It's about challenging those assumptions.
exploring
The evidence often uncovering a more nuanced picture.
And I think that's exactly what we did.
I think so too.
We dove into this research on dates and blood sugar.
Yeah.
And it's way more complicated than we might initially think.
Way more nuanced.
And it's not just about that immediate spike or no spike. It's also about these potential long-term benefits,
Right.
especially on the gut microbiome.
The gut microbiome, yeah. Such an important factor.
It's so important.
For overall health.
It really is. So to our listener out there, here's a final thought. If a food as seemingly simple as a date
Right.
can have such a complex impact on our health, what other commonly held food beliefs might deserve a second look?
Ooh.
What if those quote-unquote bad foods aren't so bad after all?
Interesting.
And what if those good foods are more nuanced than we think?
It's all about balance and moderation, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's food for thought, quite literally.
I love it.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
Dive deep, everybody.